Okay, so we're going to do another one of these audio-only podcasts, and I want to, first of all, encourage you to subscribe everywhere you can, or just pick a favorite one. My personal favorite is Odyssey, but most success is on BitChute. So, getting to the topic today, we have a person who has basically garnered a long career of riding other people's coattails, and finally the train is coming to a stop, or maybe we're seeing the beginning of the train stopping for one Christopher Charles Cuomo, who is the anchor of Cuomo Prime Time on CNN. And basically, this is a guy who he obviously got to where he arrived owing to his father being the former governor of New York. Remember when Mario Cuomo became governor of New York, Chris Cuomo was only about 13 years old. So he probably only remembers his father from his time in office. But in fact, I'm looking right now at Mario Cuomo's record. Mario Cuomo was first elected to high office in 1975 as Secretary of State for New York. And people who think that this is some sort of coincidence, that a guy was raised within a household that was deeply political, and his father was deeply political, and then his brother then became also governor of New York, and before that was a cabinet secretary, and after that was the attorney general of New York. This is clearly a person who is, he's riding the coattails the entire way. And the truth is that he started out his career mainly being on these networks that nowadays he might eschew. For example, he was on the old Fox Files show, which was, if you remember, I think it was on broadcast TV, and you would actually see some very sensationalist programs on it. I think that there was a Fox Files, correct me if I'm wrong, where they spent an entire episode talking about a statue of Jesus in which he was actually experiencing the stigmata. Okay, and look, it was an interesting episode, but it clearly was not real broadcast news journalism. There was another episode where they were talking about gay street gangs, which, while also pretty intense of a topic, especially in the 90s when such things, I think, would have been more likely to be seen in a Quentin Tarantino film, it's not real broadcast journalism. It just isn't. And the fact is that he then moved on to ABC, which is where the current scandal is centered around. He was at ABC in the early 2000s, and he was a co-anchor of 2020, which was the premier news evening program for many years. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ted Koppel was on 2020 for a while, or no. So let me see here. John Stossel, for example, was on it. John Stossel was great. You had Diane Sawyer, you had Charlie Gibson, Sam Donaldson, and then unfortunately they went to Chris Cuomo in 2009. But before that, Chris Cuomo had apparently a boss. So this is where, sorry to bury the lead, this is where the current saga is centered around. He had a former boss whose name is Shelley Ross, who has come forward and said that he sexually harassed her at a party in 2005. And mind you, this is something that it straddles a number of different issues in terms of workplace harassment. First things first, many examples of workplace harassment, getting away from politics, they occur without anyone else witnessing it because it's between two people in a room that's separate from everyone else, and basically it amounts to a proposition from one employee to another. Usually, obviously, it's the man towards a woman, but it could be any combination. This was not the case. This was a very public thing that happened. It happened in the presence of Shelley Ross's husband, and it is something that Chris Cuomo himself apologized for at the time. And while I think that he did the right thing in apologizing in 2005, for a while during the last cycle of the Me Too movement, he was one of the premier mob instigators of the Me Too movement, and he was constantly talking about how men need to behave better and that women deserve more ability to feel secure in the workplace. So why am I thinking that this is the end of Chris Cuomo? Well, there are politicians who go through scandals of sexual harassment who survive very easily, and among those, I would say, you have this isn't just limited to the U.S. You have Silvio Berlusconi, who was the former prime minister of Italy and one of the more cartoonish politicians that's out there, who would basically, whenever confronted about a past instance of sexual harassment, he would almost like shrug as if he would say, basically his reaction would be something like, what would you expect? This is a guy who was very obviously, had deep impulses and everything. But then again, there are people who have gotten away with it because they claim, they've turned completely into a different person since this happened. This happened with Justin Trudeau, who, just like with his controversy over having costumes that were clearly racially insensitive, blackface costumes, he also was accused of groping a fellow concert goer, a female concert goer, I think about 25 years ago. So Justin Trudeau, he was able to say, well, now I've reformed myself, I've become a very big feminist, and I've done enough to compensate for all of my past misdeeds, including the ones that have been exposed or whatever. So that's traditionally been the way things go. Now there are people who are defiant and they don't admit to anything that they're alleged to have done. I'd certainly count President Trump among those. And I would say that, let's say all things being equal, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the allegations against Trump turned out to be true, given that he was a person who did cheat on 2 of his wives. And those are things that I think they're between him and the legal system. So if somebody is suing Donald Trump for sexual harassment, that's their right. But you can't make allegations without a legal outcome. And if the legal outcome finds that there was no evidence of it happening, then I'm afraid that it doesn't matter whether he did or did not do what you alleged, because if you can't prove something, then where is the real, where's the beef, right? Allegations are just that, allegations. But in this case, right, Chris Cuomo admitted, in effect, in this email, to what he's been accused of doing. And for somebody who his entire career has basically skated off of the importance of the people that are in his family, right? He's basically just one of the hangers-on of his own family's legacy. I think that this is the end of Chris Cuomo. It's not going to be a situation like with the other examples of Trudeau or Trump or anyone else where you can simply say, oh, this is going to blow over. Because the Cuomo brand has been permanently tarnished by his brother's actions, by Andrew Cuomo's actions, and by his ludicrous defense of those actions. And while I think that it's certainly a distraction to focus on Andrew Cuomo's sexual harassment scandal, when the real scandal is what he did at the nursing homes and putting so many people into danger and probably having them lose their lives over his desire not to utilize resources sent to New York from the White House. Also, Andrew Cuomo should be blamed for the long-term economic downturn of New York. Now, I'm not going to say he's exclusively to blame, but when you've been governor for over 10 years, as he was up until recently, and New York went through the economic depression post the Great Recession and never recovered. Much of upstate New York is basically barren, and there's no hope for many of these people. If you drive through one day, and I've had to do it for work, if you have to drive through upstate New York, go through some of these towns, Syracuse. I don't think I was in Syracuse, but Rochester I've been through, Schenectady, and you can see that there's basically been a great civilization here. There have been amazing communities. This is nothing to do with politics. These are people who were, building a thriving America. There's great culture in upstate New York and in New York City, by the way. Not to say that New York City also hasn't been wronged. But the Cuomo family has been largely responsible for overseeing the downfall and decay of upstate New York. And New York State as a whole is suffering because of them. And I think as New York goes, unfortunately, so goes America. The Cuomo brothers, for years, they've traded off of their celebrity image and the fact that as a political dynasty, Cuomo was in the Clinton White House as the head of housing. I'm talking about Andrew Cuomo, and he was married to one of the Kennedy daughters, one of the daughters of JFK, and therefore he is American political royalty. But you look at the states where this American political royalty comes from, and they're a complete shambles. People are not, or at least not people who are middle to working class. They're not thriving in states like Massachusetts and New York increasingly. Okay, this is what they really deserve blame for. These would-be leaders of our society. They claim to be representing a more equal society through their policy, but in reality, if you go to states like Massachusetts, if you go to states like New York, you see deeper class divisions than if the taxes and social programs that they enact had not existed, right? People who have lived under Cuomo, they have not seen their housing get better because of all the restrictions, whether it's rent control or housing benefits such as public housing like the NYCHA, the New York City Housing Administration, which is just a total disaster. You see the same thing in Boston, where many properties are incredibly expensive now, right? Living in Boston would be, unaffordable for many of the people who were born there 30 to 40 years ago, because the property values have gone up because, yes, the biotech and academia sectors are thriving, but the people who are not within those sectors are basically excluded from the economy. And this is a critique that I think that it should resonate among people who are on the left and the right, because nobody wants a society where you can either be fabulously rich and enjoying 4 meals a day, including brunch, and be able to vacation in the in the Hamptons if you're living in New York or something, or live in the Hamptons like Chris Cuomo does, while many people barely have enough food to get by. They can't feed or clothe their families. They can't put a roof over their heads because of the housing situation, and they don't have any job prospects because industries have abandoned their city. Similarly, you see what happened with Amazon a couple years ago. I think it was in 2019 when they wanted to move into Long Island City in New York, and they were basically chased off by the hardcore left in the Democratic Party. Now look, I think that the Chris Cuomo scandal, it is yet another example of somebody's career being ended, but not for the thing that, and I don't know if his career is going to end, so maybe I'm being premature, but if his career ends because of this, I don't think that it's really the reason that Chris Cuomo should have been thrown into the dustbin of history. This is a person who, in his chosen profession, journalism, he has committed so much malpractice that he's one of the main reasons that the profession is no longer respected. He's the person who in 2016 said that he said to viewers that you cannot read the WikiLeaks emails because they are classified. However, we in the media are allowed to, which is a total butchering of the First Amendment. Once something is leaked, the classification is irrelevant. Anybody can read it. That's the way the Pentagon Papers worked. It's almost, it's literally upside down logic with Chris Cuomo. There's a guy who indulged the Russian collusion hoax for several years. He's a person who, in his interview choices, he's repeatedly beclowned himself, such as when he interviewed former, or I should say he was never a pro basketball player, but pro basketball parent LeVar Ball, trying to get him to comment on Trump releasing his child from China, and basically allowed Ball to dominate him in the interview better than LeVar Ball probably ever dominated anyone on the basketball court. You could probably go through many different episodes of Cuomo's show, because you probably haven't watched it in real life, but if you did, you could go through every episode and you would see that CNN, there's no reason that they would have him on. In fact, some of his producers have admitted that they don't really respect him in mentally or in terms of his profession, but they made a huge mistake, I think, in giving him so much airtime, because he's a person who is easily outsmarted by his guests and appears to be, he's almost never really the smartest person in the room, and he has such a lack of humility. Look, there's a lot of us who we achieve high levels of education, and yet we get into our field and we realize that you still have a lot to learn, and you have to apply your talents judiciously and try to get better and make yourself more of a resource. And that's how you learn humility, by learning from the people who do know, applying the skills that you already know, and using all of this in order to climb and become a better professional. And Andrew Cuomo can't understand things like that because he got into the field largely for reasons that have nothing to do with his abilities. And I think American media is worse off because of people like him, and he's far from the only person. But you could see that this is, I would say, a just ending to his career, if it will be the ending. Then again, CNN could basically say, hey, this was a matter that happened at ABC and it's behind us, and we're not really interested in digging up old graves or getting into somebody else's skeletons in their closet or something. It could go a number of ways, but I think that given this story and the fact that he was involved in his brother's sexual harassment scandal as an advisor and failed to disclose it, which was an ethics violation in and of itself. I think that there's plenty of reason to suspect that this could be the end of Andrew Cuomo, of Chris Cuomo being on CNN. And I think that Americans should be definitely, they should be happy for it, but who knows? Maybe they'll put on somebody who's even dumber. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute and on Odyssey, Rumble as well. I'm on all three of those for video hosting. You can find me on Minds and Gab if you want to chat. I haven't been posting too frequently there lately, but still worth a try to reach me. And on Subscribestar, you can find me if you want to throw me some money. And then finally on the newsletter, which should be in the chat below. And I have a few ideas about what my next article is going to be about.